In the next two lessons, we're going to learn how to write data to a text file and then read data back in from a text file. We're going to start out in this lesson learning how to write data to a file so that in the next lesson, we'll have some data to read in and manipulate. So let's get started. We're going to create a program. We'll call it writefile.py, and we'll use that to write our data to a file. The first step is to create a file variable or a file object that associates a physical file on the hard drive with the variable in our program. So we do that by using the function open, where we provide the name of a file. We're going to call this one text.txt, text.txt. So that's our file name, and then we also have to provide a second argument, w, which says to open the file to write data to it. So once we've issued this command or executed this statement, then we then have a file object out file, which is associated with a file on the disk. This function open creates a new file that we name, and if a file exists with the same name, then it deletes it and creates a new file anyway with the same name. So be very careful when you use the open function to write data. The next step is to simply write data to the file. For that, we have a function write, and then we just simply provide the data that we want to write to the file. I'm just going to write some nonsensical data here. Notice I'm specifically giving a new line command so that each line will exist on its own. So that this is line 1 will be on the first line of the file, and this is line 2 will be on the second line. We'll stop there, and then when we're finished, we can close the file, and in fact, we have to close the file. The reason for that is because when you issue a write function, Python will simply write the data to a buffer into memory, and only upon closing the file is the data actually written to the disk. So you have to always execute a close function on a file object to actually get data written to the file. So let's save and run the program. And then to see if our file is there, we'll type the command, type text.txt, and there's our data. This is line 1 and this is line 2. So now that we've done that, let's look at another example. We'll comment out this first example, where we're going to prompt the user to enter some numeric data, let's say some grades, and we're going to store those grades in a file. So we start out by opening the file that we want to write data to. We'll call it grades.txt. And again, we have to provide the w argument to open it for writing. Then we're going to create a variable. We're going to set it to a value. And we're going to say while grade is not equal to Q. Now I'm using Q because I want that to be the command or the letter that the user enters to quit. You might wonder, we're entering grades as numbers, but we're going to use Q as the value to quit. Understand that we're going to be writing this data as strings. And in the next lesson, when we read the data back into a program, then we'll convert it from string to int or float, however we choose to do that. So we're going to prompt the user, enter a grade, Q to quit. Then we'll get the grade using raw input. Then we will write the grade to our file, and notice that we concatenate a new line to that so that each grade will exist on its own line. That will just make it easier to read the data back in. And that should be all we have to do. So at this point, we can close the file, and then our data should be written out. So let's exit and save. Let's clear the screen here. And let's call write file. So we'll enter a couple of grades. We'll do 5, and 84, 77, 63, and we'll do 100. Then we'll enter a Q, and then it quits. So then we can type it out. Now, notice that the Q was written to the file, which is not what we wanted. So let's go back to the program. And the way to solve this problem will be to take our initial prompt, place it outside the while, write the data first. We're going to move it up to here, like so. Then ask the user to enter data again at the bottom. Now this way, when the user enters Q right here, then the test will happen up here before the write. And that way we won't have a Q in the file. So let's exit and save, and run it again. Let's clear the screen, find our program. There it is. So we'll do 100, 93, 87, 72, 66, and then a Q to quit. Type out the file, and there we go. It's very important that you watch the order of how statements are executed when writing data to a file and collecting input from the user to make sure that a sentinel value such as Q is not accidentally written to the file. Now that we've seen how to write data to a file, we're ready to move on to the next lesson where we're going to learn how to read data in from the file.